And welcome in to another episode of Irrational Confidence. I am your host, Micah, joined as always by my fellow hosts, Lino and Caelan. We have a very fun episode for you guys today. We're going to be covering, of course, the NBA Finals, but with the draft just around the corner, we're going to talk about a couple interesting prospects. But before any of that, we're going to talk about some news and notes. And really, the only news of any substance this week is some coaching news. So, to get the small stuff out of the way, Mike Brown did agree to an extension with the Sacramento Kings. That was kind of like played out in the media, which is a trend that will also go with our next coaching news, which is Dan Hurley is not going to be the Lakers coach, which shouldn't be news, but because of the way it was kind of rolled out by Adrian Wojnarowski, it feels like there was more to it than just he declined the job. So, Caelan, as our resident Lakers fan, what have you thought about how all of this unfolded, and what are your thoughts about Hurley and him not taking the job in this instance?
Oh man, this is where I'm at with this. Initially, I was pretty disappointed. I was excited about Dan Hurley being the coach of the Lakers. I think that he exhibited the mannerisms of like a real coach going forward. People talked about it being a long term decision for the future of the Lakers, which I definitely agreed with. So I wanted him to be the coach too. And when he didn't take the job, I was initially disappointed, but I kind of been thinking, to what degree was this ever going to happen in the first place? Um, Sometimes I think that these stories in the media are about other things. People were talking about Dan Hurley wanting a raise from UConn, and that could be a reason why these stories have come out. Which it kind of reminded me of like Ty Lue having the stories being connected to the Lakers, even though he was already under contract, and then of course he gets his raise from Steve Ballmer, and that's kind of how this stuff goes. I feel like so I really don't know. Obviously, they did meet, and there was a contract offer, but I just don't know to what degree did they were they serious, or was it just we wanted people to know that hey, we wanted to get this real coach, but we couldn't, so now we got to settle for whoever, because I think people are going to be disappointed with whoever they hire now. At this point, it doesn't matter. Do you guys think that they were seriously going to hire Dan Hurley, or do you think that there was like a good amount of like leverage play from Dan Hurley and then just the media spin from the Lakers? Micah, what do you think?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch how all of this unfolded. We were talking about it in our Discord server a little bit, just how like the rollout felt weird. It was like Woj breaks this tweet overnight, like they're seriously pursuing Dan Hurley. And he also kind of makes it seem like it's been Dan Hurley all along. So that's kind of contrary to what Shams has reported about JJ Redick and other candidates. So there's that controversy to begin with. But then, yeah, as it played out, it was like, okay, Dan Hurley's interested. He's definitely talked about NBA jobs, but this seems like a good opportunity, but it's also a veteran team. And then there were all these reports of this massive contract being made available to him. But then when the actual number came out today, it was lower than had been reported. And I think ultimately I land on Adrian Wojnarowski wrote a book about Dan Hurley's dad, and he's very well connected with this
Right.
family. And I think if I had to guess, it was Dan Hurley using Woj to build leverage against UConn. If the Lakers made an awesome offer, he might have done it. But I think ultimately he just thought, I just want another national championship. I want another raise like I got last time. So, Lino, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I think the only other theory is that they were going to genuinely hire him, but it does seem that the Lakers have had a history of really shortchanging the head coaching position all the way back to Ty Lue, is some of the numbers that I saw online, mostly through random tweets. But it just seems like they aren't super serious about offering a ton of money to candidates. I mean, $70 million is a lot, but the expectation that it was going to be 100 million and maybe not over 6 or 7 years. That definitely changes things for the way a lot of these candidates feel like they can come in and have some major contributions, especially a guy like Hurley, who is, at his level, a championship coach. They don't want to be shortchanged in those kind of ways. It's crazy that they got Ty Lue for what they got before he was Ty Lue, of course. But looking at who Ty Lue is now, it's like, how did you not spend $1 billion on keeping him around? So that's my only other theory, is that Dan Hurley just kind of saw the value of what kind of coach he could be, and is just waiting for the market to match up with that. But I don't think it's too far-fetched for sure.
Yeah, to me, it reminded me kind of the Monty Williams situation from a couple seasons ago, where he parted ways with Phoenix and he was like, I just want to spend time with my family. Like, I'm going to take a break. And Detroit was like, what if we made you the highest paid coach ever? And he's like, well, actually, my family could move to Michigan. That wouldn't be too much of a
Same
problem.
thing with Doc Rivers.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know how serious it ever was. I will probably won't know for a few years until Hurley maybe finally takes an NBA job. But it's disappointing because I wasn't sure it was going to work. He's such a commander in chief, I guess you'd say, of a basketball team. It's like he's judge, jury, and executioner, and I don't know if he would have been able to kind of pull some of that back in the NBA, because like vets definitely wouldn't have been cool with like getting screamed at and practicing 3 times a week. So I don't know. Hopefully we'll find out eventually, but it was definitely an interesting thing to watch unfold in the media.
I think real quick before we move on, I think it really sucks because I think whoever they hire now, the James Borrego, I guess they'll hire Redick. I don't know. I have no faith in either one of those guys. I thought that Sam Cassell might be an interesting hire, but at the end of the day, I think they're all just like okay, and I don't know. I think they'll be right back at the drawing board 2-3 years from now.
It's definitely possible. Yeah, if I had to vote, I would say Sam Cassell would probably be who I'd pick up out of all those options. Seems like he's somebody that LeBron might trust, that the guys would respond to. We'll see, but also like they're running out of candidates. Like I saw a report today from Windhorse, I believe, that was saying the Cavs are locked in on Borrego too. So it'll be interesting to see when the dust settles who ends up where.
If you're James Borrego, which one would you guys choose between coaching the Los Angeles Lakers and the Cleveland Cavaliers?
For sure.
Yeah, so
it's crazy, right?
It's like the Lakers are a premier franchise, but I don't love the prospects of that job. Like you have LeBron for maybe 2 more years where you're going to be in a pressure cooker. Like you have to win, huge expectations. Like Cleveland, like even if they trade Mitchell, it's like, okay, we'll build around what we have left. Like, they're good. There's going to be an understanding. So yeah, it's crazy to think about it, but I do think the Cleveland job is at least going to be more stable, if nothing else. All right. Well, now we can transition to some thoughts on the NBA Finals so far. We have had the first 2 games to this point. The Boston Celtics have won both of them. The first one, more of a blowout. The second one was close down the stretch. Boston made some key plays to pull away. There are a lot of trends so far. Before we get into like adjustments or what we're looking at going forward, I just want to get both of your reactions about what we've seen on the court so far. Lino, I want to throw it to you first. What have you seen from either of these teams that might have surprised you or, underwhelmed your expectations going into the series?
Yeah, I think the main focal point for me going into the series was going to be Kristaps Porzingis and how healthy he was going to be and the effect that he was going to be able to have on this series. And he's proven that he's more than healthy enough to make some major contributions. He's been on fire through 2 games already and was effectively a walking mismatch out there, as Dallas had very few answers for his dynamic offensive game. And, the offense is a whole other issue for the Mavericks, which is slightly surprising to me. But for the most part, Kristaps' contributions offensively, defensively were probably the most surprising to me. I don't think it's that I thought he was going to be bad on either end there. I just didn't expect him to be this good and this vital to the Celtics' success so far. What about you, Caelan?
Yeah, full disclosure, the Celtics have been a team that I'm just like, I have not enjoyed watching them a ton over the course of this season and maybe even just the past. I'm a Lakers fan, so obviously not big on the Celtics. But I think just the biggest surprise for me is just what a blast I've had watching these first 2 games. I thought Boston's been incredible and just really special and just fun to watch, even for a guy like me who doesn't enjoy Boston, doesn't want Boston to succeed. But I've had a really good time. Even in game 1, it wasn't close, but I just thought the performance that Boston put on was special. Obviously, it wasn't Dallas's best performance, but I still thought what Boston did was very special. And watching those guys on both sides of the ball is just an equal treat for me. It does seem like they got the perfect matchup. That's a little disappointing for me because I feel like it's it's just part of this run that Boston's been on in the playoffs where things are kind of easy. But at least this time it's not due to injuries. It's just the matchup. Boston's switchability and their length and their strength and connectedness on defense has been super special and fun to watch. And on offense in game one, it really felt like they shelled them. I checked the box score right after the game, and I said, only 16 threes? It felt like 21 threes. It really did. But I just think that speaks to the fact of like how much fun that game was. I was really into it. So I think that was just the biggest thing for me, just how much fun it was to watch Boston kind of take these guys apart. But what did you kind of come away with your main takeaway, Micah?
Yeah, I think for me it starts with Boston's defense. Just incredibly impressive how they've been able to work as a unit and really display their versatility. I think it all starts with Jason Tatum being able to guard Dallas's centers. That just throws off everything they want to do. That's the reason we haven't seen so many lobs and alley-oops. Is you can try and just run your pick and roll at Jason Tatum, but then it's probably a switch, or you can try and bring up whoever Kristaps is guarding, but then Jason Tatum's just waiting in the paint for you because his guy isn't a shooter. And I feel like that's really clogged up a lot of what Dallas likes to do on offense, and that's why we're seeing Luka, who's still giving great performances, but he's having to take a lot of mid-range fadeaways. He's not getting to the rim the same amount because there's so many bodies down there. And Boston's doing it without having to overhelp a lot. They're just being really intelligent about where they're arranging their guys defensively, who they're playing off of. I mean, they came into the series decidedly ignoring Derek Jones Jr. and PJ Washington. And I think I saw a stat that those two guys are shooting like 15% from three in the series so far. Coming into the series throughout the playoffs, it was 37% from three. Those guys, like, Dallas is going home, they're role players. Those guys could start going crazy. But that gamble has definitely worked in Boston's favor, and it's affected Luka to a degree. Like we saw in game one, he only had one assist. He's had some turnovers that are very uncharacteristic for him, but I think it's especially impacted Kyrie Irving, who is dealing with a lot, just trying to get past Drew Holiday and Derek White. But then behind that, there's so much length and help. So definitely impressed with Boston's defense. And then on the other end, Boston has been very decisive on offense. They have not played around. They are finding the mismatch, getting 2 feet in the paint, generating an open three. And this roster is just constructed beautifully. I think it was Tim Legler said his finals MVP right now would be Brad Stevens. And I thought that was pretty apt because this is just a beautifully constructed roster. And even their, 6th, 7th, 8th guy, like Hauser's giving them good minutes. Pritchard only made one shot last night, but it was a big one, that 3 at the buzzer. So they've gotten just enough from everybody else. And then I wanted to ask you guys this. We don't have to get too sidetracked on it, but I was trying to think of Boston's top 5. Are they all top 30 players in the NBA?
I don't think Drew Holiday is a top 30 guy.
Drew's probably like right outside of it though. Like he might be 34.
Maybe top 40.
And he might be finals MVP right now.
Yeah.
It's true.
Which is what's crazy. But I've just been thinking, maybe it's like top 35. But yeah, there's the amount of talent they have. And, like we've talked about Tatum. I can't remember where we ranked him, but, in the bottom 5 of the top 10, they don't have like that true elite superstar. But it's just been so incredible to watch. But I did want to talk about Tatum's performance so far because it's been so interesting to kind of watch the discourse because from a scoring perspective, it's like objectively he has not been good, but what he's able to do defensively, guarding the other team's bigs, his passing and playmaking has been good. Not super complex reads, but he's hitting the right guy. But I wanted to hear what you guys have thought about Tatum so far, and if this series has changed kind of where you'd rank him in the NBA hierarchy. So Caelan, I'll throw it to you first. What have you made of Tatum in this one?
Yeah, it was really so. It's so funny just trying to describe this game. Obviously, game 2, the shooting was terrible. The shots he takes, a lot of them aren't great shots in the first place. And recently, we've been going back and forth about his shooting form and his stroke and how it's not choppy. It is kind of fluid despite how funky it looks. But that little flick at the end of it, and then the kind of gather at the beginning is so kind of weird. So kind of that's been strange to kind of get a close look at that in the finals. But yesterday, he was passing the ball well. He was playing we talked about, I said Nick Batum, which felt a little disrespectful. But honestly, Micah, when you said compared him to like Iggy, I almost thought, well, Iggy in the finals is kind of better than this. That's almost too complimentary. He might be somewhere in between Nick Batum and Iggy in terms of just the role that he's playing right now. Just in this series alone, just talking about the first two games of this series, it's interesting. It's whenever a star is relied on in a more typical way that a star is relied on in terms of how they're supposed to score and handle the ball and those things. When they're having off game shooting, I think it will affect the team more because there's almost a psychological effect of this is our leader. Whereas Jason Tatum, when he has a bad the C's don't look at Tatum to handle that scoring load every game, even though he technically does lead the team in scoring. I don't think he's looked at as that guy that they lean on and depend on. I think everybody feels comfortable getting their shots. And I mean, they know how talented the team is. It's really been interesting. Liam, let me just ask you this, Liam. Where are you at on the Brown Tatum discourse? Do you think there's a world at the end of this series where people say that Jaylen Brown is a flat out better player than Tatum, or do you think just a 4 to 7 game sample?
I think the tale of time is going to really matter here because if we look at previous series and the kind of flack that Jaylen Brown has gotten for not showing up or not being able to dribble with his left hand or not really being able to have a scoring impact when it matters, like all these things that we say about Jason Tatum, we've said about Jaylen Brown before, and then the other guys usually playing pretty well. I think the real question here is, are these two guys supposed to be on the same team together? Like, it's just very interesting that when one is doing super well, the other one is usually struggling in some kind of way. And maybe we can all thank our individual basketball gods for not living in a world where they're both playing very well all the time, because that would be a nightmare for the rest of the league. But right now, this is just kind of what they do. And so I don't know if it has really anything to do with Jason Tatum's abilities. And maybe it is just like who he shares the floor with. It is tough to make yourself matter. It is tough to ignore the fact that he plays with 5 guys who might be top 30, top 35 guys. Like, you can want to matter as much as you want. Like, you can want to be in that position, but if you genuinely have 4 guys who can average 20 points a night, you just can't fabricate the value there. And I think Jason Tatum's a good basketball player. He'll go down in history as one of the best role players in Celtics franchise history. It's going to be awesome for him. He'll get a statue, whatever. But I just don't know that it'll ever matter so long as they keep constructing crazy teams like this one moving forward.
It's a bit of an apples to oranges comparison, but I'll think about Draymond Green whenever KD came to the Warriors, and my theory was always that he could shoot before that, but because he didn't shoot for like 2-3 seasons, like he just never shot the ball, his skills atrophied. And once he had to shoot again, it took him several years to kind of get back into the flow of it. And it's not the same thing, but I'm wondering, Micah, maybe you can answer this one. If you think Tatum would be a more kind of a typical scoring number one option on a team that was built to need him on a night to night basis. Is there like some sort of effect where that ability kind of wears off a little bit because they don't need you every night? What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. Tatum, it's like definitely a top 10 player. I think Tatum is very good. He made all NBA first team this year, which technically is like a top 5 player. But to me, he always has felt closer to Paul George than LeBron James. And that's not like a slight, or maybe you could say than Kawhi Leonard or whoever it may be. But he's like, to me, like Oklahoma City Paul George. Like, that guy was an MVP candidate. He was an incredible player, but it still wasn't like your primary initiator running 35 pick and rolls a game. It was a guy who was a part of a team, amplified everyone around him, made everybody better on both ends, made everyone's lives easier on both ends. But it wasn't the same level of, okay, there's 3 minutes left, 1-4 flat, I'm just going to take us home. And it doesn't mean like his value is muted because of that. Like he's still an incredibly valuable player. Boston is so good because their two best guys are two-way players, because he can box out Daniel Gafford and average 10 rebounds a game. But to me, the Tatum conversation that's more interesting is, what does he want to be? And Lino, I think this is what you were talking about. It's like he's saying the right thing in the press conferences, right? Like after the last game, he was like, I'm okay being a facilitator. Like we're so close to our goal. Why would I let my ego get in the way? Which I get, except he still took 22
Right.
shots. It
Right.
wasn't
Still
like
making it.
he was 6 of 8 or 6 of 12, and it was like, yeah, I just was getting doubled. I had to make the right
Right.
play. He was missing a lot of shots. He was trying to be aggressive, and it wasn't working. And credit to him, he also had 12 assists or whatever it ended up being. So still overall a good offensive impactful game. But it's just interesting because I feel like the best version of Tatum might be more of a mental switch left than something like skill wise he needs to develop. And I'm not saying he needs to do like the D Wade LeBron Heat thing where he's like, I need to be the number two, like Jaylen Brown needs to be the number one. But I think if he can see himself, and I think it's going this way, but if he can see himself more as a part of this incredible ensemble, like maybe the best ensemble we've ever seen, then he can probably feel more comfortable in that role and maybe only take 12 shots, and maybe they blow Dallas out if he does that. So that's kind of my Tatum take so far. Really good player, just impacting the game in other ways other than scoring.
I think we spent a lot of time talking about the Celtics, but I'd love to kind of hear y'all's thoughts about Dallas, what you've been seeing from them, and kind of your feedback on what they could be doing better going forward. Micah, I'd love to start with you.
Dallas, I think game one is almost a throwaway for me. I think going from like a hard fought series to a week off, then right into, a road game in Boston really seemed to mess with them, because that first quarter, they were just like shell shocked. I mean, the Porzingis thing, that's hard to respond to with the way the crowd reacted to him and how he played. But that game, I have a bunch of notes on stuff they needed to change, need to do differently. And then my game two notes are a lot shorter because they did a lot of those things. I feel like they cleaned up their help. They didn't give up as many threes. Just overall defensive intensity was much better. So then it comes down to, how are they going to stay in games with Boston? And I was texting with our friend Jaron about this today, and I have my old basketball coach in high school. He would say to us sometimes when we play a really good team, he'd be like, listen, guys, if we play our A+ game and they play their C- game, we might have a chance.
Oh man.
And it's not to that extreme in this matchup, but it does feel similar. It's like Dallas needs to figure out how to be as perfect as possible to take advantage of the games like last night, where the Celtics shoot almost 10 of 40 from three. That's a game you should really try and take. But Dallas shot, and they made fewer threes. I think they were 6 of 26 or something. They're both in the 20s as far as percentage. So they need to figure out how to take advantage of that. I think probably the biggest curveball in this series I was not expecting was Lively struggling the way he has. He's been, in my opinion, the third best Dallas center. I think Kleba's been better just because of the defense and spacing. And then Gafford's been able to do his rebound and rim protecting stuff. I don't know if it's just because it's a step up in competition, if it's the stage of the finals, but they need to get Lively on track. And then obviously Kyrie Irving is just struggling mightily. And like we talked about with that one game, Minnesota put Jaden McDaniels on him and he kind of struggled. Like half of them are shots Kyrie can just make and isn't making. But this Boston defense is really good. So those are kind of my initial Dallas thoughts. Caelan, what have you seen so far?
Dude, I wanted to share this story that I heard Jason Timpf tell to Colin Cowherd when they were talking about the game. It was a really good story. Shout out Jason Timpf from the Hoops Tonight podcast. But he was basically like, he was coaching, I forget how old, maybe like middle school age kids, but he would let them play King of the Court, and he would do it two different ways. The first way, they would just start like, body to body right there. The defense is already there. And he said they would score maybe like 1 out of 10 times. And then the other way they play King of the Court is they'd have the defender start underneath the basket, and he'd roll the ball to the perimeter, and then he'd have to kind of sprint out there and try and guard him. And he said whenever they did it that way, they would score about 4 to 5 times out of 10. That's a pretty significant jump in efficiency, right? And this is what we're seeing and experiencing with PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr., right? Two guys who were integral in the first 3 series, to get here, and the 3-point shooting, particularly from the corner. And they've hit 2 threes combined through the first 2 games of this series. I just don't see that changing. It might change a little bit in Dallas, maybe because of the home court or whatever, but they're just not going to get those looks, right? Like they're catching the ball with guys already in their face, right? The way where the kids were scoring 1 out of 10 ways, or 1 out of 10 times, and I just like I see that continuing to be the case because of the defense, the switchability. That's kind of been one of the biggest things. I mean, we saw Luka's going to get off. He just is. He's like Luka's banged up. I think he's very like seriously hurt. I think he's like legitimately injured. I think he's in pain. I think he's hampered. I think he's not at his best, and he's just unstoppable. Like he's just going to get his shots whenever he wants, and he's going to make them. I expect Kyrie to play a little better, but obviously that's been a big issue. But I think one of the big things for me was I was looking at PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. Derrick Jones, I mean, both of them, I think, they're a guy who they can occasionally attack a closeout and have success. Derrick Jones Jr., when I watch him, he looks like the Celtics are making him look like how the Mavs made Josh Giddey look, just in the way, just his drives have no chance. No chance. DJJ is getting his shots swatted. It's been bad for those others. They have no chance of scoring efficiently, and that's a big problem. And I think if Kristaps stays healthy throughout this series, I don't think the Mavs have a chance to come back. If you tell me that Kristaps will miss couple games here and there at some point in the series, maybe the Mavs can get back into it. And at that point, maybe it can go either way. But if Kristaps just keeps playing, I think it'll be very tough for the Mavs to get back into this one. Lean, where are you at in these 2 games going back to Dallas? How do you see this shaking out?
I definitely see things very similar to the way y'all have, and I've picked up on a lot of those things, especially the issues with their role players in PJ, Derrick Jones Jr., and Derek Lively. Those 3 guys just came out of a matchup where you would feel very confident in their abilities to perform otherwise because they face such an incredible defensive team there, a team with size, a team with switchability, and the defensive player of the year they were pretty much able to handle. And so switching to an possibly injured Kristaps Porzingis, you would expect them to still have that same success or even more success. And that's just not been the case. KP has been incredible at guarding the rim, and he has disrupted a lot of what Derrick Jones Jr. brings to the table as far as rim pressure, lob pressure, and things of those natures. Like you mentioned, Derrick Jones Jr. I think got blocked like 3 times in the same possession by KP, Jason Tatum, and then Jaylen Brown. And I was like, holy hell, this is brutal for this guy's ego, but also his flow of the game. Like it just changes so much of their confidence. And I think it matters because it's affecting, I think, Luka and Kyrie's decision-making process, given that I do believe Kyrie has had some opportunities to make some smarter plays. And that's my general take about Kyrie this series, is that I think he can do things a little bit smarter and make a little bit better reads here and there, because there are opportunities where PJ and Derek have been wide open for a 3 and they've missed them.
Kyrie's distracted by the storylines of the fans in Boston. He doesn't feel as focused on how he's been throughout the playoffs.
I think so too. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but I just feel like there's some smarter reads out there. I know it's tough in the finals, this matters, to put the ball in PJ Washington's hands. But if he's wide open for the 3, you just have to keep giving it to him until they start making it. And so that's what I hope to see moving forward, because I do think those guys can shoot it. I do think there are moments where Kyrie and Luka can bend the defense just enough to get those guys a good look. They just haven't been making them really at all. And I think they can regress towards the median a little bit more here in these next few games. I think it's probably time to cut out these Josh Green minutes. He's been getting absolutely demolished by pretty much anybody on the court. And you probably just need to throw Tim Hardaway Jr. in there to see if he can have a microwave effect. Like, if you can just have someone who can make some threes, you already have Josh Green doing all the same stupid stuff that Tim Hardaway was doing. You might as well have that plus someone who can make some shots. So those are most of my thoughts. Derek Lively, he's a rookie. this is maybe well beyond the expectations we can have for a kid of his experience, but hopefully he'll be able to have a little bit more confidence now that he's kind of gotten his shit rocked for 2 games straight. He can kind of go in with no ego and just be ready to play ball. But I do think they can at least win this next game, figure some things out, because it's not like Boston has been scoring a bajillion points. Like, I think they're averaging like 103 over the past 2 games, which is all they've needed. But Dallas has the offensive ability to rise above 105 points if they can keep Boston in this area and this efficiency level, especially if Jason Tatum is going to continue to struggle with efficiency.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds. I think the role players obviously will need to step up. I think Kyrie will need to play better. As far as rotation, I'm not sure if this is a Derek Jones Jr. series. Caelan, the stuff you were talking about, like, I think they just need a little more decision making, because I think that's Boston's kind of gambit. Is they're like, okay, we'll play off you. Your release isn't that quick. We know we can get back out to you on above the break threes, and it's like you're going downhill against Porzingis, and it's like we're not really worried about you being able to make advanced reads out of that. And I love Derek Jones Jr. Like, I'm a big fan of his, but this matchup specifically, I think I want to see more Dante Exum minutes. I know that doesn't sound like super exciting, but he's a better passer, better playmaker. And the regular season was a better shooter. I'm not saying he's going to make them all, but maybe he'll give you 36% from three or something like that. But you just trust him to make a few more passes off the dribble. Listen, these are the tools in the toolbox. Like, a lot of people are calling for Hardaway. I'm not a Hardaway guy, because if you throw him out there, he's going to start trying to make up for lost time. He's going to be jacking up triples. And if they don't fall, then he's only hurting you because you're not getting other stuff. Exum, good defender, slightly worse than Derek Jones Jr., but like still a solid defender. You're getting some playmaking, and maybe the shots fall. And I feel like, Lino, like you alluded to, the defense really hasn't been the problem. And if Kyrie was up to his normal standard, if Luka, few less turnovers, few more free throws, it could easily be 1-1 going back to Dallas, and we'd probably feel a lot differently. But I will say, and this is just a feel thing, but game 2 never felt as close as the score kind of made it seem, with the way Boston was struggling from 3. It's like if they were even having a slightly below average night, it would have been much further. And now Dallas was struggling from 3 too, but Boston you expect to kind of be more of a 3-point focused team. So yeah, my adjustments would be maybe a little more Exum and try and find ways to get Kyrie moving, but it's going to be tough.
Can I want to pose a schematic question here, because, and I thought about this myself and I don't have the answer. I genuinely want to see if you guys do, or maybe you guys don't know either. But Micah, you just touched on DJJ and his drives when Kristaps is down there, and those have been brutal. They've been absolutely brutal. And my thing is, I don't know what to do if with Boston's defense being as stout and disciplined as it is, and the 2 centers for Dallas do not stretch the floor, right? You want to be aggressive, and they always say you should attack shot blocker through his chest, right? Easier said than done when Kristaps one of the best rim protectors in the league. My question is, what do you do? Like, attacking Kristaps when he's down there has proven to be a bad idea so far, and it seems like a bad idea. Like, you still have to be aggressive and putting pressure on the rim. I don't know what the answer is. Do either one of you guys have like a way to solve that Kristaps thing when they don't have a floor spacing 5?
Lino, do you have anything?
Man, look, I think you can maybe ask for some more Cleaver minutes at the 5.
Mm-hmm.
You can space it out a little bit more.
I forgot about Cleaver.
If they could figure out a way to utilize the dunker spot, I think that could generate some points. If they could just get behind Kristaps and get a shot up faster, maybe not necessarily a lob, but even like if they can do a pick and roll. It's a play that LeBron and AD ran a ton, where it'd be a pick and roll straight into a pass to either LeBron or AD that was just sitting in the dunker spot, and they just go up, and you just have to draw the center out a little bit more. But their backline defense is just too smart for that most of the time. But if there's some way they could run some like off-ball actions that confuse those guys back there, you can maybe generate some points. But that's just not gonna. You just can't spam that play for a whole basketball game and expect to have winning results. You could try PJ at the 5, go PJ at the 5 or 4, and then Kleber at the 5, and just hope PJ starts shooting better. You have a little bit more spacing, go a little smaller. That's something that I might take a look at, and maybe they've already tried that and it hasn't worked. But those are the two things that come to mind. But I do not feel qualified to fix this Dallas Mavericks team against these Celtics.
Yeah, it's tough, and I think in a perfect world, like with different personnel, you would try and occupy him off ball more, because right now he's usually on a non-center. He's on Derek Jones Jr. or somebody, and Tatum's on the center. So if you could somehow occupy that guy, like if Derek Jones Jr. is setting a screen for Kyrie, and it's like, okay, well, if Porzingis doesn't come up on that screen, like Kyrie's just going to get an open 3 or an open lane to the basket. But that's a lot to ask of all that weak side action to be happening while the strong side is getting swarmed by Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jaylen Brown. Like, it's so difficult. But yeah, ideally you'd occupy him in that way, make him come up to where that off-ball screen is just a little bit, even as a decoy, to then have somebody attack strong side. But with such good defenders all around, it's not like you can just guarantee the timing of that. It's like, yeah, that's great that he came up a little bit, but now I actually have to get by this all NBA defender at will, which other than Luka, I don't think you can trust anybody on this team to do. So I think it's a lack of shooting and playmaking outside of their two stars that has made it, I don't want to say easy for Boston, but it's definitely helped Boston be so strong on the interior.
That's a good ass answer, Micah. That was good.
I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been texting Jared, like, we can figure this out. Like, there's got to be a way.
We just put our minds together. We can find a way to win in Dallas.
It's tough, man. It is tough. But, Luka's like an all-time player. I think we'll at least see one game where it's like, well, Luka won that one by himself. And then maybe if they get like a hot shooting game from some role players in Dallas, maybe they could get it back 2-2.
Dude,
it's definitely going to be tough.
There have been so many exciting plays in this series. Do you remember from the last game? I think this is probably the second quarter. Kristaps hits that pull up like 27-footer, just drilled it, gets a block on the other end, and then they go. What was it that they get another 3 right after that? It was, what was it, like Jaylen Brown or something?
This is game 1.
Was it game 1 or game 2?
No, I think it was. I think it was game 2.
Game 1. He got the block that went into that Hauser no dip 3. I think.
That was game 1. He had game 2. There was another sequence where Kristaps hit a 3, immediately gets a block on the other end, and I think it was Jaylen Brown that hit like another 3, led to a timeout. I feel like Boston has really owned those momentum swinging plays, and it's funny because Dallas has probably been like the most exciting team to watch, with all the praise of the backcourt and the offense, and Luka's been spectacular, and the alley-oops that they just, get so many of those, and the PJ plays and all the bravado, which, by the way, PJ's bravado seems to be gone because they aren't the best team anymore. And so it just feels like, other than the schematics and the talent, and other than that, it almost feels like, man, Boston's really, like, they've been here before. They've already had the failures. Every champion, it seems like they lose. Like they take their playoff lumps.
They were saying that the Timberwolves in the press conferences during the conference finals or the semi-conference finals, and Kat were like, "Haven't we lost enough? Like, I think we're good."
No,
like, you're talking about we got to lose big. I was like, "No, brother, you got to lose big." And these Celtics have lost big on multiple stages. And I just got to say that this Boston crowd is absolutely feral. Holy cow, do they get loud out there? And it's got to be so tough. I do think being in Dallas is going to help, especially these young guys, especially these role players. Like, I don't know that PJ Washington or Derek Jones Jr. have ever played a game in that environment in their 5-6 year career. And then you got guys like Gafford, guys like Lively, who definitely have never seen anything like that before on the biggest stage.
And like Caelan talked about, it's affecting Kyrie too. I mean, he's whatever the stat is, 0-11 or 0-12 versus Boston since he left. I mean, there's like some real emotional stuff going on with him when he plays there. He hit a 3 early in game 2, I think, and like turned and kind of like said like boom or something real loud and kind of flex. And I was like, that's a strong reaction for a first quarter 3. And I'm sure it's like he wants to have that breakthrough moment to help his team because he's been struggling, but it also felt a little extra emotionally charged. And I don't see how it couldn't. I mean, he's handled it better than he did like when he was in Brooklyn. He was like flicking off the crowd and stuff, but it's definitely, it just has to get at you. Like there's very few guys that doesn't.
I think in his head, like that's when he plays his best. Like that middle finger to the crowd game was the game 1 where he went off. That was his best game, the only game he showed up that series. I think in his head, like he'll play better if he plays into it, but I think like Lane said earlier, I think it's just, like he's missing the reads and stuff because he's not locked in on the game. But who knows?
Yeah. And before we move on, I do just want to say, speaking of Kyrie not being locked in, part of it is because Drew Holiday is just incredible.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and we've talked about like he's in a role that's so beneficial to him, like, but he's been scoring a lot in this series. Now it's almost all off ball stuff, cuts, threes. But what he can do for a team in like a role player role is incredible. And like the Heat played against Milwaukee several times with some success and some not versus Drew, but he was always somebody I was worried about as a second option. I was like, this guy, I mean, sometimes he takes ill-advised shots, but both offense and defense causes so many issues for the opponent. And for him to be a fifth option now, it's just borderline unfair what he's able to do out there with the amount of energy he can conserve, not having to run 30 pick and rolls. I think he'd be my finals MVP right now. Maybe him, or I don't know. Porzingis kind of had a down game in game 2. So not that it matters, but just want to give a shout out to Drew. It just truly incredible stuff. And I really think a mentality that Boston needed. Like he's been there before. He's won a championship. He's team first all the way. And I really think he's kind of the emotional leader of this team. Like we talked about, I don't think they look to Tatum. I get the sense this team looks more to Drew than anyone else.
Shout out to Drew Holiday, man. He's a championship caliber guy on every level of the game, on both sides of the basketball, and clearly in the locker room too. I think he just brings this. I mean, he just also seems like an awesome dude. Like he's a guy you want to get up and play hard for because he's going to go out there and give it all that he's got. So he'll be one of the few people I'm happy for winning another championship, despite the jersey that he wears.
I have been asked that question as well, and that was also my answer. They're like, "You rooting for anybody in Boston?" I was like, "Drew only." That is it. But no, I mean, I will be, as like a more neutral fan, I'll be happy for guys like breaking through. But yeah, as a Heat fan, Drew, and that's still with an asterisk because it's like he should be on the.
You should.
You don't think you'll kind of be? Well, I'll tell you this: if Jaylen Brown goes off and he wins the Finals MVP, I'll definitely be cheering for the. Maybe that does cause a little, the discourse, the dissent, maybe. I'm trying to sow those seeds in that locker room. So I am cheering for Jaylen Brown to win this award. And I want him to be clearly better than Tatum. So people are like, man, Jaylen Brown's better than Tatum.
Did you guys have any thoughts on the coaching so far and the adjustments by Kidd and old
Joe Maz, man? I mean, this is.
He's tapped into some third eye stuff. Like his interviews all sound crazy. He sounds unhinged in ways that felt funny at first when he was a bad coach, but now that I guess he's apparently a good coach, it's very daunting.
Yeah, he's a killer, and it's clear with his game plans. Like you could have waited till game 2 to put Tatum on the center. Like you could have just seen how game 1 went. And he's like, nope, that'll mess up what they do. We're not wasting any time. Like you're on Gafford. And he does the same thing with like he adjusts his defense in game, like fourth quarter when they're up, they sell out to threes more than any other time in the game because they don't want to allow a comeback. Like he's maniacal. I don't love his personality or him like off the court, but it's he's done a great job coaching wise, and I think Kidd has been fine, but the deck's stacked against him, and it's going to be tough. You guys have anything else finals wise before we move into a little draft preview?
Man, play Dwight Powell.
Don't do that.
Give it a shot.
Pray for Jared.
If the Celts win 4-0 or even 4-1, because I'm pretty sure Dallas will get at least one of these. So if they win 4-1, does that push you guys a little closer? Because I doubt y'all are one of the people saying that this is an all-time team. But would it push you a little closer to that if they just dismantle Dallas?
No,
Okay,
not really.
good talk.
It's a great team, really awesome roster. I think we've seen some incredible teams not be able to win more than one championship. And so, if this team goes on, like they just have so much more to do rather than win a championship to become one of those teams. But, talk to me next offseason, postseason, see how this goes when Jason Tatum demands a trade at the deadline because he's not the number one guy. We'll see how this conversation goes. But I'd be impressed.
Yeah.
They would have done better than I thought they were going to do this season, and definitely better than I prayed for.
Yeah, I think if they win in 5, that would make them like 80-21 on the season or something like that. And then, I mean, that's historic. Like, not I don't put that much stock into regular season dominance. It's kind of more like a prerequisite for an elite team rather than like something I really weigh heavily. But they were definitely a super dominant regular season team, and they've been dominant in the playoffs. They've beaten what's in front of them. And this Dallas team is really good. This is a legit finals team, but to me, it will be their only legit playoff contender they've beaten in this run. But history doesn't really look at that. I feel like history is just going to look at win percentage. They're going to see 80-21, and they probably will get put in those conversations. But the conversation's been coming up made me realize I don't really think about this because like I've seen people talk about like the 2013 Heat in this regard because they only lost 20 something games, like 22 games, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess like I had never thought about like single season greatness because of what you talked about, Lino. I think it's more about like the dynastic aspect of it, like how many rings do you rack up with this group. So I don't know. It's not something I put a lot of thought into, but I'd definitely be impressive if they swept or 1-5. That would be hard to ignore.
But I'll do it anyway.
So this is where I'm at with this question with this Celtics team. Just this iteration, this year's Celtics, and the roster is very good. This is the problem. This is what holds most people back. It's that Tatum gonna shoot 6 for 22 in a finals game. He can go 1 for 7 from 3, and what people are thinking about theoretically. The best version of this team, if their 6 guys are all cooking like for a whole season and into the playoffs and Tatum is doing number one things, like they can have a game like this where Tatum doesn't play well and they can still beat the Mavericks. That's fine. If you're playing other like all-time teams, there's no way that Tatum can have a bad. You know what I'm saying? Like if Tatum was that guy consistently, a top 3-ish, 4-ish player, Jaylen Brown was maybe a guy who could dribble with his left hand and just made you feel better about having the ball in his hand. They'd be right there. Like the other guys, Derek White and Kristaps and even the coach and the system and how they play, that's all in place. And I think that's all like all time ready. I think if Tatum was a little better, you'd feel better. Because the other all-time teams, whether you talk about the Warriors or the Miami Heat with LeBron or whatever Lakers team with any one of their legends, like all those players, the number one guy is always going to be, he's a no question, like top 10-ish, whatever. And, Tatum is just not.
I think that's probably the problem too, is that we've seen them face literally the guys that we've talked about. Albeit they were younger, it was a different team, but we've seen the mano a mano of Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown versus LeBron James and his second guy. We've seen them just a couple years ago against even an older version of the Golden State Warriors that didn't have KD on it. Like we've seen them not match up with those guys, so it's hard to believe that if they were given this team and had to go up against those guys again in their prime, that it would happen any differently if Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown aren't going to show up for all 7 games.
The real first take question should be something along the lines of like, is this the best team ever without a top 5 player on it? Because it's like incredible. It's like them and the 04 Pistons, I guess. Like, are those
that 04
the 2
Pistons
best teams
team
ever?
different. They would demolish this Celtics team. They would.
No, they
Yes,
would
they
not.
would demolish them, bro. It would not even be close. They would demolish them. They would demolish them.
What era are the
That
refs
doesn't
from?
matter. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter,
The spacing Boston plays with?
bro.
Rasheed Wallace is covering that much
Bro.
ground?
Yes, handily.
Oh, you picked the wrong guy. Rasheed Wallace would be awesome in today's league. Rasheed Wallace,
He's
Yeah.
learning as he
he would
fights.
be awesome. Like his skill set was perfect. Like they're just too tough, too physical. These are boys. Like you would be like putting like boys against men for real. Like it's
I mean,
different.
is
It's different,
is Porzingis getting the whistle he's getting in this finals against them? Because I think he'd be fine if that were the
man.
case.
I'm wondering who's guarding Derek White. See,
Tayshaun?
What do you mean?
the Pistons
Who's
stopper
guarding
right there.
Derek
Known
White?
Pistons
Why is Derek
stopper,
White the guy we have
White.
to?
Hey, yeah, if you were a Heat fan, you would know why.
You would know.
You would know.
I
All
lived
right.
it.
Well, we'll run that on 2K when we get off. We'll see 04 Pistons versus the Celtics
Telling
team.
you,
I don't know a better way to end our finals recap than who would Rasheed Wallace beat up first, Jaylen Brown or Jason
oh my
Tatum.
god,
So that's the final so far, folks. We're hoping the next time we record, we'll still have a finals going on. I think we will, but we'll see how Dallas responds once the series shifts back home. So wrap up this episode of the pod. The draft is just a couple weeks away. Very exciting time for all of the NBA world. And so we thought, as your favorite NBA podcast, we would highlight just a couple guys we expect to go probably around the top 10 or so, just so you have an idea of the types of players that are being selected on draft night. I do want to give a pretty lengthy preamble, just say we are not draft guys. We follow people we respect and have, followed for a long time, trying to learn about these guys on the fly. So we are not watching high school tape. We are not watching EYBL reps. Like, we're just here to tell you guys kind of the brass tacks of what's going on. If you want deep dives, Brian J Draft, aka Brian Schroeder on Twitter, Ben Pfeiffer on Twitter, Hoop Intellect on YouTube, all great resources. But with all that being said, after you check out those guys and you check out this part of the podcast, we're going to start with the person that seems to be the consensus number one pick, and that's Alexander Sarr. So Sarr is a 7'1", 225, 7'4" wingspan, 19-year-old from France. So you hear those measurements and you're like, okay, this is a big guy. What kind of big guy is he? Very athletic. This dude, when you watch his defensive possessions, it's this guy's not supposed to move like this. It is super impressive how agile he is. He is a great rim protector as well. Like I said, 7'4" wingspan. Like, he can swallow up guards that are driving to the cup. And he can also switch out. I think he'll provide a ton of defensive coverage. The offensive game is really, I think, where the ceiling is going to come from. I expect him to be an all defense level guy. But the offense, he's shown some shooting ability, but definitely not like elite shooting. But the stroke looks fluid, and it looks like something he's intentionally worked on. You can tell there's some shot doctoring going on where he's really trying to go through the proper steps. So, Lino, what did you see? What do you think about Sarr as a prospect?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a lot of the points that I saw in some of my studies. I watched a little bit of film here and there, read a couple articles on what kind of his draft experience has been like so far. And obviously, the more and more people learn about him, the more people like him as that number one pick. Again, a guy who's 7'1" with a 7'4" wingspan is always going to be interesting when it comes to a basketball player. But a guy with a 7'1" who's 7'1" and with a 7'4" wingspan that plays like Bam Adebayo is also super interesting. His switchability, his rim protection, I believe that he has the mold to grow into the type of player that Adebayo is as a ceiling. But I haven't really seen anything that makes me believe he can be that offensive fulcrum the way that Bam is in the Heat's offense, at least. Sark has shown the ability to make the right pass out of the short roll, but I'd be very curious to see how he does in the dribble handoffs and out of the post. Speaking of that, not really sure we'll see a ton of passing out of the post from him. His current offensive game is relatively limited to crashing towards the rim and PNRs. The three-point shot does need a lot of work, like you said, but I think he's making them at like 27%, which is not nothing. It's not good, but it's not nothing, and it's something you can work on. Like, it's better than a center who's not been shooting the basketball at all
Mhm.
and just hoping that they can develop a 3-point shot. This is a kid who's been working on his shot, is shooting at a decent volume, and is trying his best to figure it out. And I think he had a pretty decent showing at the draft combine when it came to that shooting. So anybody who does take him early is buying that shooting and hoping that it flourishes, which I do think there's a chance that that's there. I think as a pick and as a possible number one pick, I'd ideally like someone with a little bit more excitement on both sides of the ball, but I think he's going to play a great role for these teams that are at the top of the list, like the Hawks, like the Wizards. Both of those guys need upgrades at the center position, and he could definitely be that for them. But what were you thinking about his prospect as, a guy who could go to one of those teams, or do you think there's like another team he would best fit on right now in that lottery space?
Yeah, I think you have to project what he's going to be. And he is pretty slight. He's not like a super heavy dude. And because of that, I'm not sure if he's a 4 or a 5. And his rebounding will probably determine a lot of that. Like, he's not an excellent rebounder right now. So if he has to be a 4, then he is somebody more in the vein of an Evan Mobley if the shooting doesn't really develop. And then, like, Mobley's a great player, but we've talked actually a lot on this podcast about what a difficult fit he is, because if you don't
Mhm.
have shooting at the 4, you have to have shooting at the 5, or your spacing's compromised. So I don't know exactly. I mean, ideally, he'd go to a team that kind of has more shooting in the front court than Atlanta does, but they also, if they're going to go for a hard reset, might just play him at center and let him kind of take his lumps. Or they could just kind of be a team like Oklahoma City that's like, we're going to get beat up on the glass, but we think, these other aspects of his game will make up for that. Some of the comps I've seen thrown around are Evan Mobley. That's definitely the defensive
Mm-hmm.
prowess, but maybe more of a
Mhm.
tweener than a 5. Jaren Jackson Jr., if the 3-point shot comes along. Triple J was definitely more of a shooter in college than Sarr is right now. So that would be a stretch, but it's possible. Nick Claxton is another guy who's a big, that can switch, play really well. So we'll see what comes of it. But I think Atlanta makes a lot of sense just because they'll build around him. And Washington, if he goes number 2, I think that's fine as well, because they're pretty much stripped bare right now, other than Bilal Coulibaly and I guess Denny Abdia to a lesser extent. But it's like, at that point, you're not drafting for fit. And I do think, I haven't dug all the way into all the prospects. So he's probably who I'd have number 1. So I think if you're a top 3 picking team, you just take best player available. And I do have that as Sarr at the moment. Caelan, do you have any reactions to this type of dude, or anything kind of off what we said?
Yeah, I really like what you guys said a lot. Full transparency for the audience. I despise college basketball, and I never spent a second of spend a second of my life watching it. So I don't know any college players until they get to the league. That being said, I do understand this is not a very good draft, and what I want you guys to do, can you tell the audience about if Sarr were to go number 1, like where in any other year, an average NBA draft, like about what pick do you think Sarr would be going at?
Where did we get Bam at?
Bam was 14th, but Bam is like developed wildly. I think
Yeah,
Mobley would be a good comp. I think Mobley went 4th overall. I think he had a little more talent coming in, but I would say like 5 to 8 probably in
yeah,
your
I
average
would say that.
draft, just
Yeah,
depending.
You think
I
he's about a
agree. I
Who
Mobley?
think
else is in
5,
there?
maybe to 10. Like, I just don't. I think if he in a normal draft, a top 3 pick is going to be elite on both sides of the basketball. And in our weaker drafts, it's usually guys who are extremely, extremely good at like a very smaller subset of skills. And that's the kind of draft we have here. I think we do have some really interesting players in this draft that are going to be very good, but a lot of the skills on the opposite side of the ball that they're already good at are going to have to be developed in the league, which is kind of also a trend for, I think, some of the other players we'll talk about.
Man, the the Mobley comp is tough. He's like a real Mobley's a real player. He's talented. He's not a player that I personally would ever, I don't know, want to be drafting, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair. And if he develops into a 5, then you could
That's
be
true.
in the
That's true.
Porzingis
That's true.
conversations. If the shot starts to
Mhm.
fall,
That's a fair point.
because that, I mean, to me, that's the most valuable archetype in the entire NBA right now, other than on-ball superstar, is stretch
Yeah.
five who protects the rim and shoots threes. And so that's why I think he's worth the number one pick, because if you do land that, like we've talked about, same thing with Chet. It's like, yes, he's a good player, but what he does for your entire
Mhm.
ecosystem in terms of spacing, like it's
That's a
so
fair point.
impactful. So yeah, I think that's why he's number one. But yeah, I think as we talk about this draft, Caelan, I'm glad you brought this up because it is important to give context. It is a weaker draft, but there are really good players in it. There be people who are stars in their role. I don't know if there will be an All NBA player in this draft, but statistically, there will at least be a guy who's a 1 or 2 time All Star, and probably a lot of other guys that are right under that cusp. So and it's also just a weird draft. There's like strange, like the best shooter is like 6'1", the best rim attacker is like 6'5", but he can't shoot and he just tore his ACL. So it's
Oh
just a
man.
strange draft. I think draft night's going to be as much fun as it's been in a while because guys' ranges are wildly huge. Like you could see there's guys mocked from number 2 to 15, depending on the guys you look at. So I think that will be a good time to transition to the second guy we'll cover today, because he's another one of these unique prospects. This is Nikola Topic. So he is a Serbian guard. He's 6'5" with a 6'6" wingspan. He's only 18 right now. He's turning 19 in August, I believe. So one of the younger players in the drafts. His game, he's a big guard, not a very developed outside shooter, but driving and burst to the rim, super impressive. Almost exclusively a below the rim athlete. He's not getting on top of it and punching it on guys, but a very good finisher and creates a ton of rim pressure. And then is a good passer. He's not an elite passer. He's not like a Trey Young, Luka level guy, but a good point guard level passer that can make all the right reads in the pick and roll, can make the skip pass. But his driving is going to be, if he becomes anything close to a star, kind of what determines that. So, Lino, what did you see on Topic?
Yeah, from the tape I've seen, this guy can just get to the rim at ease. And, this is actually a guy that Micah mentioned earlier as far as being one of the best rim attackers, but pretty much just tore one of his ACLs. And so there's a lot of question marks around that. And so when I was watching that, I was like, is this guy the type of basketball player who can, get these knees fixed and then continue to play basketball the same way? And honestly, because his type of game doesn't really require all the same amount of explosiveness that you would see in typical situations like Derrick Rose or players like Russell Westbrook. This guy uses a lot more like Luka, SGA type scoring when it comes to great timing, physicality that's not just brute speed, but really has to do with like strength and getting people out of their position so you have the space to shoot. And then an elite touch that I feel like I haven't seen since like Goran Dragic was in the league. He just has a great way of scoring around guys, not just over them. So while his knees might be an issue, I don't think it's really going to be explosiveness that elevates his game. So it might not require him to be at full strength there. I do really hate his 3-point shot. I think it looks really weird and it's pretty flat. And he's going to have to work on that if he's going to have any success in the league. As far as just the pick and roll is just going to get much, much more difficult. The defensive capabilities in this league are going to be, I think, a lot tougher to score around. And I think that might balance out with his ability to get to the free throw line in the NBA. I think it's a lot easier to do that here than it is in the league he's currently playing in. And very similar to the way guys like Luka, Jalen Brunson create space and put defenders on their hip. He seems to have mastered those skills at a very young age, but without a dependable mid-range game or a dependable perimeter shooting, there is a chance he has a very similar situation as Scoot Henderson right now, where it really takes him a while to figure
Mhm.
out what he's going to do in this league.
He's playing or played really well in the Euro League, and the second best
Mhm.
league in the world. Started for a while, then came off the bench, and then was injured. But he is a very talented driver, a very talented orchestrator. The two biggest questions for him are going to be, does the 3-point shot fall? He seems more comfortable taking it off the bounce. I don't know if you saw this as
Mhm.
well, but he's much
He
more
does that like
fluid.
hezzy dribble and then
Yeah, a lot of hang
yeah.
dribbles. And then he looks pretty fluid going into that shot, but it's his catch and shoot that looks more mechanical. He kind of short arms it. But the positive is he shoots like 88% from the line. So he clearly has good touch. That's usually a good indicator for guards that their shot will come along eventually. So right now he's a one level scorer, but I think it's realistic to imagine he could flesh out his game more. It might not ever be to an elite level, but we've seen guys like De'Aaron Fox, Dennis Schroeder, John Morant figure out how to add a mid-range game and then even extend to the three to varying degrees and have success. Defensively, I'm not sure if it's ever gonna be great. He's big. He's 6'5". What did I say? I don't have his weight, but he's 6'5" and he's big. So like it's not like he's gonna be Trae Young out there, but the lateral quickness is not
Can't
really
move his
there.
hips at all.
Yeah, so that'll be something teams have to kind of work around. But again, in this draft where there's not a lot of creation prospects, like this guy could be the second best ball handler on like a very good team if it works out. And to get into that, some comps people do throw around Goran Dragic. Obviously, that was a long time ago, so I don't know what Goran looked like as a prospect. And he's a guy that made an All NBA team, an All Star team. So Goran's very good. So that is probably a higher in outcome, especially because he's bigger than Goran. So like 6'5" Goran is probably like a 5-time All-Star. So but also faster, more aggressive Rubio,
Yeah, I can see that.
aggressive Josh Giddey. And then maybe on the lower end, larger, faster Jeremy Lin is somebody else that I've seen kind of comp to his play style. So, Caelan, do you have any thoughts on Topic or anything kind of based off that?
Jeremy Lin's a hilarious player.
Yeah, shout out to Hoop Intellect. Hoop Intellect on
What is
YouTube had
that?
the Jeremy Lin comp.
Literally, the exact video I watched was
Yeah.
the Hoop Intellect video. Great
Hoop
video.
Intellect is amazing. If anybody, shout out to Hoop Intellect, like just the best YouTube breakdowns. I love just sitting in my living room and just like binging a whole draft class. Like he's so talented at what he does. So everybody check
Yeah,
out Hoop
like
Intellect on
I'm just
YouTube.
like Caelan in the sense that I do not watch college basketball, and I'm definitely not watching EuroLeague. Not from a lack of interest, but I wouldn't even know where to begin to watch EuroLeague. But when it comes to draft time, literally usually around the finals when there's a lot of bigger gaps in between games, I just fill that time with watching Hoop and like YouTube videos about the draft class, and I just start at one and go all the way down the mock draft, and then maybe zoom in on guys that the Heat might draft or teams like the Mavericks or the Lakers that I'm interested in, look at those guys to see who might fall in our lap. But yeah, I don't watch a lot of college basketball, so, and I definitely don't watch any high school basketball. So shout out to guys like Hoop Intellect that are putting together the materials for me to form my opinions on.
Awesome. I'm
No
glad
doubt.
you guys are really scummy about your basketball and you go and dig deep into the draft
Hey, got to get ready
preparation.
for summer league.
Uh,
It actually all started because Safi invited, for his bachelor party a couple years ago, he invited us to Vegas to go do the Summer League. We were going to go watch Summer League for the first time. But he asked me specifically because there are a lot of guys who don't watch basketball that were in his groomsmen party. He was like, "Hey, like they watch basketball casually, but they're not going to know anybody out there. Could you like put together some notes for like at least maybe like the top five, however much time you have, like some players for them to keep an eye on while we're there." And so I had to like go learn about the drafts and like learn about the prospects. And um, I think that was the year Paulo Banchero got drafted. And so it was that draft class. So I'm just sitting there watching YouTube. I think at the time Box and One was doing like draft comps and like full draft analysis. And so I just watched those YouTube videos, take notes on my phone, and then I sent them like this Google Doc with like all of these notes. And since then I've been hooked. I was like, wait, draft hoops is actually kind of fun. Like this is like very safe gambling where I don't actually have to pay a penny.
Dude, player development is probably my second favorite thing about the NBA, other than like watching your favorite team win a championship. Like, and
Mhm.
it's how you kind of get by on the lean years. Like when the Heat weren't good, I was watching Justice Winslow pick and rolls like my life
oh my
depended
gosh.
on it. Like I was like, okay, how is he going to develop into an all-star? Because like it's either that or you just stop watching your favorite team, and I don't know, player development's like a ton of fun, and the draft's the best place to start. Like I don't have the time to do the whole grassroots like watch high school film. But definitely shout out to the people that do it. And I love just doing little binges right before the draft to kind of make up like opinions that are essentially just a conglomeration of other people's opinions and just being like, oh, I like this guy or I don't. Because like Lino said, it's almost like stocks. It's like, oh, I love Sarr, but I think Topic is going to be a bust. And then it's like, well, you're right or you're wrong. And you should brag about it to your friends like you would a fantasy football
That's the
player.
best part, though. The payoff is great because we get to November, December, and someone's like, who is this? Like, who's the guy from freaking Pajimski? People go like,
Yeah.
who the heck is Brandon Pajimski? It's like, I knew Brandon Pajimski. I
Mhm.
watched 30-minute YouTube videos about
Yeah.
his ability to handle the pick and roll, and it's like that payoff is a lot of fun.
Not to like plan the show on the show, but we should definitely do like you two guys put together like a little mock draft or something.
That would
Oh,
be
God.
fun. That would be
That would
fun.
I'll totally
fun
sit
and
that episode
incredibly
out, by the way.
inactive.
But yeah, you you guys should do that.
You could be Adam Silver. You could announce each pick. You could. Yeah, guys. So thank you all for tuning in again. We're going to be getting a little more draft coverage, try and cover a couple prospects at the end of each episode, just again, so you guys know who we're talking about. We'll continue to cover the finals. Hopefully we get some exciting games. Once the Lakers actually do hire a coach, I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. But yeah, so we're excited to keep cranking out some future episodes. If there's a prospect you're interested in, please reach out to us at TikTok at Irrational Confidence Pod, confidenceirrational@gmail.com. If we get any listener requests, we'll definitely prioritize those. If you guys want to hear us blabber about, some obscure prospect from Bowling Green or something, we will do it. But other than that, thank you guys for tuning in. We're also on YouTube now. If you guys prefer like a video format, we're posting there.
Thank you, Lino.
And for myself, thank you, Lino, for doing that. Check out Lino's lives on TikTok if you want to see him edit those and also talk about books. At
Check
Lino
out
the
Lino's
Reader.
book stuff on TikTok. It's very interesting.
Yep, Lino the Reader on Book Talk, highly recommend. Even as a non-reader, it's a lot of fun. But if I'm being honest, my father was an author. There's, it's like a rebellious thing. But for myself, Micah, for Caelan, for Lino, my good friends, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you guys very soon.